once the war was over and the men returned home, uh, most of the women were fired from their positions, and the men took back over. But it had given women a taste of other ways of living, of other ways of being woman than the domestic life of the stay-at-home mom and housewife. And the memory of that is going to help transform the female U.S. American experience in the decades to come. This period also saw great gains by the labor movement, as we so desperately needed to produce all the equipment of warfare. It gave labor unions a lot more leverage, a lot more bargaining power, and so they agreed. They agreed not to strike. In exchange, a lot of concessions were made, things they'd been demanding for a long time. So the quality of life of the average American worker greatly increased over this period too, and you can read about both the women in the workforce and the impact of the war on the labor movement in section 23.3 of the OpenStax text. More than 350,000 African Americans served in were in active service in the military during World War I. One of the most noteworthy groups, they were in segregated units. One of the most noteworthy Black American soldiers groups were the Harlem Hellfighters, and the very next video will tell you about the Harlem Hellfighters' experience in the war. So this presented an opportunity. Black soldiers were fighting and dying for the cause of the country, just like everybody else. They were playing a vital role, and could probably hope to come back home and see that respected and rewarded. But the forces of white supremacy back home anticipated that, and some pretty gross, horrific things occurred in response to that. So you've got this Mississippi senator. This is one of those, you're saying the quiet part out loud. All right, you can if you can try to imagine in the minds, especially in the South, people worried that the black soldiers will come back home expecting to be rewarded for their service. Listen to what this senator says. Impress the Negro with the fact that he's defending the flag. Inflate his untutored soul with military airs. Teach him that it is his duty to keep the emblem of the nation flying triumphantly in air. It is but a short step to the conclusion that his political rights must be respected. He's saying out loud that they're going to come home. He's actually using the language of rights. See, they're going to come home and expect their rights to be respected, and we can't allow that. And back home, the streets erupt. You see race riots increasing in frequency. In 1917 alone, there were race riots in 25 cities, including a particularly brutal one in East St. Louis, where 39 black people were killed. And the second video to follow this will speak to the son of a survivor of the 1917 East St. Louis riot, or better, I think even better, the East St. Louis, better to call it the East St. Louis massacre. Lynchings of black people increased from 38 in 1917 to 83 in 1919. This period also saw the passing of the 18th Amendment, prohibition, which we've talked about, and we'll talk more about. You can read some in the 23.3 about the implications at home about prohibition, but we'll talk about that in more detail in the next lesson. And also the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, which we've already talked about in a previous lesson, but that material is summarized here in section 23.3. Ultimately now, what it's time to turn to is what it was actually like for the United States in the war. We've been looking at what it's been like back home while the men are away fighting. Let's talk about the actual experience of fighting in World War I. So please watch the 3 videos that follow: the Harlem Hellfighters, secondly, the East St. Louis Massacre, and then this video which will talk about the actual combat in World War I.